Read the ancient texts, and you find a marginalized teacher who told his followers to love their enemies and turn the other cheek. Look at certain factions of modern American religion, however, and you find a culture steeped in modern gun rights and military might. How exactly does a faith built around self-sacrifice and meekness evolve into an ideology obsessed with a very specific, aggressive brand of masculinity? The origins of this shift aren't found in the church, but in the movie theater. Enter John Wayne. In his private life, the famous actor married 3 times, carried on high-profile affairs, skipped church services entirely, and carefully avoided serving in the military during World War II. Despite his distance from the church and its virtues, his on-screen persona, the rugged, violent protector who breaks the rules to enforce order, became the gold standard for Christian manhood. Go back to the mid-20th century. American men were migrating away from physical, agrarian labor and into corporate desk jobs. Punching a clock stripped away the traditional markers of rugged independence, leaving an entire generation anxious about their status of providers. Against the backdrop of the looming Cold War and the early tremors of feminism, the Victorian-era version of Christianity, which focused on gentleness, restraint, and quiet piety, these men felt they needed tougher armor. John Wayne stepped perfectly into that void. Through his films, he projected a brand of unapologetic, imperialist white masculinity that gave anxious audiences a sense of control and power. In war epics like Sands of Iwo Jima, Wayne taught millions of Americans that aggressive male dominance, and specifically redemptive violence, were necessary tools to achieve a greater moral good. Prominent evangelicals overlooked the theological contradictions of these cinematic characters. Wayne's willingness to get his hands dirty and fight the bad guys offered the psychological defense mechanism needed to survive the modern era. There was a glaring roadblock in this strategy. The historical Jesus, who instructed his disciples to put away their swords, did not fit the John Wayne mold. These 2 columns show the shift. In the 1990s and 2000s, evangelical pastors and authors began stripping away the traits on the left and replacing them with the ones on the right. Pastors like Mark Driscoll and John Eldredge rebranded the Savior. They rejected a Mr. Rogers Jesus, replacing him with a tattooed warrior and an ultimate fighter. A new theological baseline took hold. God was now pitched as a warrior, and because men were created in his image, true Christian men were designed by the Creator to be inherently dangerous. This shift turned scriptural meekness into weakness and rebranded Hollywood aggression as righteousness. This warrior Christ theology did not stay confined to niche Sunday sermons. It was actively packaged, mass-produced, and sold through a multi-billion-dollar consumer engine. Groups like Promise Keepers organized massive stadium rallies across the country, filling the National Mall and sports arenas with men who were told they needed to reclaim their dominance. Everyday consumer products reinforced the message. Believers purchased millions of copies of Christian survivalist books, while youth groups taught young boys to shoot guns and bows as a way to learn biblical manhood. The sheer volume of this merchandising created an inescapable cultural bubble. For millions of consumers, Hollywood's stylized version of militant masculinity successfully masqueraded as historical biblical truth. When a demographic spends 50 years learning that goodness requires aggressive, rule-breaking strength, there are bound to be real-world political consequences. This deeply ingrained theology primed conservative voters to actively seek out modern political strongmen who operate with the exact same swagger as a John Wayne cinematic hero. The demand for an unapologetic, tough guy protector overrides traditional concerns about a political candidate's personal morality, language, or piety. This political alignment is the intended outcome of decades of militant teaching. In their anxious quest to project strength and protect the tribe, this culture achieved its political goals. But to do so, they effectively abandoned the founder of their faith, replacing him with a cowboy who worshipped power.